Hi, I'm Brianna, and I'll be talking about life as a forest ranger, which is my future career, and specifically women in the Forest Service. It took a very long time before women were accepted into the forest industry, but they worked hard for it. It took decades of determined protests, a ruling by the U.S. Attorney General, and an act of Congress. Women tirelessly worked to be treated with the same respect as men. For several decades, women were not hired by the Forest Service to do any kind of field work. The only place that women could work was doing paperwork in the regional offices, which were established in 1908. But men did not look upon women in the supervisor's office with favor. The policy to allow women to work in the general offices was established to give men the idea that a female clerk could not handle the field work required in the Forest Service, because it was too rough, and that this rough work was meant for a two-fisted ranger or forest officer. But these men didn't take paperwork into consideration, which was just too much work for these two-fisted rangers and supervisors. Finally, in 1913, the first woman was employed by the U.S. Forest Service as a lookout. Her name was Hallie M. Daggett, and she worked as a lookout for 14 years. After Hallie was assigned to be a lookout, most men thought that after a few days of life on the peak of the mountain, that she would become scared from the danger and the loneliness. But Hallie proved just the opposite. She was full of energy and high spirits, and every day she loved her job more and more. But this was not the turning point in history women were looking for. For years, district rangers and other employees' wives had to serve as unpaid volunteers. Women who complained about doing this free work were labeled as being unloyal to their husbands and the Forest Service. These women were considered necessary, convenient, and a free source of labor for ranger districts that were short on money and staff. Things that the women would do included giving men that fought fires their supplies, serving as telephone operators, cooks, and overall managers of the entire ranger districts. And keep in mind that they were doing all of this unpaid. In some cases, the wives began to be acknowledged as better leaders and organizers than their husbands. Men began to see that women could do their job just as well, if not better. And today, women are involved in every aspect of national forest management. They are even being employed in the research field, state and private forestry, and international programs. But the most noticeable changes for women are in the more dangerous duties, like smoke jumping, firefighting, and law enforcement. Women were admitted to these more dangerous jobs in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Eventually, women were even hired into professional ranks as experts in every field and as line and staff officers. Now that we have talked about women in the Forest Service, you might be wondering what a forest ranger actually does and what it takes to become one. Forest rangers are in charge of many things, and it can prove to be a very challenging but rewarding career. It is a forest ranger's job to protect and conserve natural resources in forests and rangelands, along with conserving and managing the wild areas in their care. As a forest ranger, it is your job to protect the forest and everything within it. This means patrolling forest areas on foot or in vehicles, snowmobiles, and ATVs to prevent harm, taking care of animals when they get hurt, and working hard to prevent and fight forest fires. Sometimes fires may get out of control, but it is your job to get the forest back to its natural self. You are the first to respond to a natural or man-made threat, and you have to be willing to work with visitors on a daily basis. Campers, hikers, tourists, and researchers visit forest lands and parks all the time, and it is your job to keep them safe. This means keeping all trails clean and free of undergrowth, inspecting campsites, and tranquilize and trap animals that may be a threat to visitors. You will also be the first on scene if there are any mishaps or if any visitors get lost. You may need to lead a search and rescue. It is a forest ranger's job to talk to visitors about things they can see or experience and educate the public on how to enjoy the forest without harming it or themselves. Sometimes forest rangers speak in schools or with specific groups. You need to explain the forest or park rules and regulations to visitors and make sure that everyone is in compliance with state laws when it comes to hunting, fishing, camping, and enforce those laws. Forest rangers can work for state and for local government agencies or federal agencies. A lot of rangers can start out as forest technicians and work their way up in the field. Forest technicians work in forests to plant, analyze, and improve timber stands, repair trails, maintain facilities, suppress forest fires, and enforce regulations. They also deliver community education, administer permits, and collect data when needed for environmental impact studies. The last thing I will talk about is qualifications. Qualifications to become a forest ranger depend on grade level. Like a GS2, you only need a high school diploma, while a GS5 requires a bachelor's degree. While each state has its own qualifications, you usually need the bachelor's degree in any field that helps with your career, like forestry, ecology, botany, biology and wildlife, and there's a few others. You need to be a U.S. citizen, have a valid driver's license, and a clean arrest record. If you are thinking of being in the Forest Service, I hope this helped you and that you are as excited as I am to get into this career.